What's your nationality? What's your nationality? Is it Moorish American? Are you British? I thought you were Argentinian American. Are you Cherokee? I thought you said Guatemalan. Algerian American. Oh, you must be Brazilian American. Mexican American. Oh, she's Sicilian American. Is it Turkish American? Is he Guatemalan?
Islam, Shalom, Hotep, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. And to Moorish News Media 7, Blood on the Doorpost 7, Part 1 and 2. This is Part 2. Welcome, Grand Sheikh, my guest.
Islam.
And thank you for joining us today, Grand Sheikh. And thank all of you for joining us today. Right now, this is one of the greatest shows on earth because what we're about to do is not tell you, but show you questions in our holy book, 101s, question 28, question and answer, and 29. Thank you. This picture of question 28 and 29 is speaking of what the proof that we always needed. What is the proof? Question 28. Why did Allah send Jesus? 2, why did Allah send Jesus here? Grand Sheikh.
Well,
What is the reason that Allah sent Yeshua to this earth?
Well, there was a
Key
portion,
28.
Islam, and I'm not going into it verbatim, but there was a portion of Palestine that was being governed at that time by individuals.
Was it the pale-skinned nations of Europe, Grand Sheikh?
Well, they are
Because-
described as being those who are of the pale-skinned nations of Europe. And they were the same ones that crucified Yeshua according to their law, as we read in chapter 40.
Is that Roman law?
That is correct, according to Roman law.
Okay, and how long ago was that?
It's over 2,000 years ago.
2,000 years. That's a
And
long
it
time.
looks as if things have remained pretty consistent with regards to the activities that's going on there, which is why we have been instructed to not to amalgamate or marry into the pale-skinned nations of Europe.
Okay, now, this is nothing personal, okay?
No, it's not.
Now, a lot of people, understanding today, a lot of people are wondering, well, wait a minute, you don't want to amalgamate and marry. You have people in the world today, and that's exactly what they do. They marry out of nationality. And, people are like, well, this don't seem right. Can we go further into why the prophet didn't want us to marry and mingle into the pale-skinned nations of Europe after all this time, 2,000 years ago? Let's talk about what occurred 2,000 years ago, why we were not supposed to marry and amalgamate to the pale-skinned nations. Because we know that the Palestinians are still fighting. That war
If I could just read an excerpt from the Circle 7 Koran.
Could you please?
At the end of time, fulfilling of the prophecy. The last prophet in these days is Noble Drali, who was divinely prepared in due time by Allah to redeem men from their sinful ways and to warn them of the great wrath which is sure to come upon the earth. John the Baptist was the forerunner of Jesus in those days to warn and stir up the nations and prepare them to receive the divine creed which was to be taught by Jesus. In these modern days, there came a forerunner who was divinely prepared by the great God Allah, and his name is Marcus Garvey, who did teach and warn the nations of the earth to prepare to meet the coming prophet, who was to bring the true and divine creed of Islam, and his name is Noble Drali, who was prepared and sent to this earth by Allah to teach the old-time religion and the everlasting gospel to the sons of men, that every nation shall and must worship under their own vine and fig tree and return to their own and be one with their Father God Allah. the Moorish Science Temple of America is a lawfully chartered and incorporated organization. Any subordinate temple that desires to receive a charter, the prophet has them to issue to every state throughout the United States, etc., that the world may hear and know the truth, that among the descendants of Africa there is still much wisdom to be learned in these days for the redemption of the sons of men under love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. We, as a clean and pure nation, descended from the inhabitants of Africa, do not desire to amalgamate or marry into the pale-skinned nations, the families of the pale-skinned nations of Europe, neither serve the gods of their religion, because our forefathers are the true and divine founders of the first religious creed for the redemption and salvation of mankind on earth. Therefore, we are returning the church and Christianity back to the European nations as it was prepared by their forefathers for their earthly salvation, while we, the Moorish Americans, are returning to Islam, which was founded by our forefathers for our earthly and divine salvation. Islam?
Islam, now that's a lot that you said, Grand Sheikh, and you said it in such a way that people may think that something is wrong, you understand, with us for returning Christianity back. But I want to read 28 so people can understand why did Allah send Jesus to this earth to save the Israelites from the iron hand oppression of the pale-skinned nations of Europe who were governing a portion of Palestine at that time. 2000, and look, how long has that been? Key 29, about 2,000 years ago. Now listen. Today is 2021, and the Palestinians are still fighting for their land, okay? Now, this is why the prophet said we're returning Christianity back to the European nations.
Can I go over it again?
Can you go into that? We got a minute that you can go into it.
Okay, we as a clean and pure nation descended from the inhabitants of Africa do not desire to amalgamate or marry into the families of the pale-skinned nations of Europe, neither serve the gods of their religion.
Let's talk about why.
That includes the statutes and the policy that's set up within these states when they do these investigations that are actually inquisitionist activities that are not approved by the policy. So it's nothing personal.
It's nothing personal because we have branches of private law that support our citizenship. Is that not right?
That is
And to be
absolutely correct.
specific, we have the laws, the branches of law govern the sacred obligations of American citizenship.
That's
okay?
correct. This is the reason that this organization is playing a useful and definite part in the advancing of such ideals, because there is a difference between being subjected to the state and the sacred obligations of American citizenship.
Okay, ending, let's talk about the earthly and divine salvation. When we have an earthly and we have a divine salvation, and I need our people to know that you must get to the spiritual to divinely connect to the trust. Right now, you're trapped inside of the matrix. And chapter 48 speaks of that earthly and divine salvation that you just spoke of.
Correct.
In order for you to get there, you got to return the church and all of that, because what that deals with is that, we're talking about the Crusades, with Constantine. The order of operations. What kind of man was this? Now, if the beast's head was taken off in 1453 Byzantine, that had a lot to do with what was going on with the Christian church back in that time. The Holy Roman Empire. Is that correct, Grand Sheikh?
Our lesson speaks about those people who represent the Lord's self and those who accept their teachings.
Absolutely.
So the connection that we see is when we look at Constantine, the fact that his head was taken off, and in our literature he's referred to as Satan.
Now, you do have some nations, Grand Sheikh, what they do is, like, they're great families, like some of the Italian families, they'll say, well, hey, you can't marry outside the nation, or you can't marry if you're not a purebred Italian. And then you have that within the family, whereas, well, wait a minute, you may be a Moor, but we can't allow you to marry that Moor. You have that going on also. What you say about that, Grand Sheikh?
Well, you have those who represent the Lord's self and those that accept their teachings. And those that accept their teachings, a lot of them look like us.
Okay, so I want to end this in saying, by the Prophet Noble Jew Ali, the industrious acts of the Muslims of Northwest and Southwest Africa. These are the Moabites, the Hammatites, the Canaanites who were driven out of the land of Canaan by Joshua and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. In later years, they formed themselves kingdoms. These kingdoms are called this day Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. I would like to say to all the Moorish Americans out there in the world, know thyself and thy Father God Allah, because the Prophet Noble Jew Ali came for the world, uplifting the world, Grand Sheikh. If you want to give a word to our people, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Know that you are loved by a great God. Do something for your nation and proclaim your nationality, because there is strength in numbers. Let's not talk about what used to be. We talk about Wall Street, but we can have a Wall Street today. Give us a great word, Grand Sheikh, before we return to this show.
Islam, beloved, I just want to put that out there, that there are different classes of citizenship, as the Prophet explained to us in the divine warning. So understand that when you are an American citizen, you have a sacred obligation that's beyond being subjected to the various 50 states. You have, you actually are responsible for being a part and parcel of this said government. Islam?
Thank you very much, Grand Sheikh. Remember, birthright theft is a great, great sin, and punishable by what, Grand Sheikh?
Mental slavery.
Punishable by mental slavery. Now, understand that the founding fathers are not are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not George Washington, all those people you heard. And the courts do not belong to the Europeans, so stop thinking that the Europeans is all about the government. And please, you guys, learn to love instead of hate. And understand that we are obligated. Freedom is everyone's job. Thank you very much.
Islam.
Islam.
Nationality. What's your nationality? Is it Moorish, American? Are you British? I thought you were Argentinian American. Are you Cherokee? I thought you said Guatemalan. Algerian. Oh, you must be Brazilian American. Mexican American. Oh, she's Sicilian American. Is it Turkish American? Is he Guatemalan?